The sharp, biting Boston air of an October morning did little to faze Lena. Perched with practiced grace on a steel beam 15 stories above the ground, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The city stretched out below, a sprawling tapestry of brick and glass, but her focus was razor-sharp, narrowed to the colossal skeletal frame of the Epsilon Tower. This mega-project promised to redefine the city's skyline, and for Lena, it represented more than just a job. It was a testament to her tenacity. For 10 years, ever since Lucas's father had walked out, she had been a single mother, the sole anchor in her son's life. Lucas, now a bright, curious 12-year-old, was the reason she endured the punishing hours and the demanding work. Every rivet she secured, every weld she laid down, was a silent promise to him, a down payment on a better, more stable future. She envisioned the day she could finally afford a place with 2 bedrooms, a home where Lucas could have his own space to grow, a place with a little more light than their cramped South End apartment. She adjusted her hard hat, the sun glinting off its surface, and prepared to fasten the next crossbeam. The cacophony of the construction site was a symphony she knew by heart. The rhythmic pounding of pile drivers, the high-pitched whine of a saw, the low rumble of cranes lifting impossibly heavy loads. But that morning, a new sound cut through the familiar chorus. It was a faint metallic ping, a noise so subtle it could have been mistaken for a stray piece of equipment. Then it came again, louder this time, a chilling high-frequency sound that spoke of material pushed to its absolute limit. A cold dread, sharper than the autumn wind, sliced through Lena. "Hey, did anyone else hear that?" she yelled, her voice a thin thread against the wall of noise. No one responded. They were all consumed by their individual tasks, deaf to the ominous warning. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble. This was no ordinary vibration from a nearby crane. It was a deep, guttural shudder that resonated through the very bones of the building, a sickening pulse that felt fundamentally wrong. Alarms began to blare, piercing the air with their urgent electronic cries. A massive dust cloud, a ghostly grey spectre, erupted from the lower levels. The shouts of men running for cover replaced the din of machinery. Then came the sound that would echo in her nightmares for years to come, a series of deafening cracks, followed by the sickening, grinding groan of a structural support column failing. The entire south wing of the building, a section of fresh concrete and rebar, began its slow, inevitable descent into chaos. Panic was a tangible thing, a suffocating presence in the air. Lena saw the terror etched on the faces of her colleagues as they scrambled for the nearest emergency stairwell. A 50-yard dash for their lives. She could have run too. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to save herself, to get back to Lucas. But her gaze snagged on a single, isolated figure. A welder, no more than 20 feet from the crumbling edge, was trapped. His leg was pinned in a twisted nest of cables and rebar, and he was struggling, desperate but unable to break free. Each passing second brought the avalanche of steel and concrete closer. Her body moved without conscious thought. She ignored the frantic cries of a co-worker, a seasoned foreman named Dave, who was yelling at her to get out. Lena sprinted across the swaying beam, her boots clattering on the unforgiving metal. Debris rained down around her. A large piece of concrete smashed onto a lower floor, sending up a geyser of dust. She reached the trapped welder, whose face was a mask of fear and resignation beneath his dented hard hat. "I can't... my leg," he stammered, his voice choked with terror. Lena didn't waste a second. Her adrenaline-fueled muscles strained as she pulled and pried at the cables, her calloused hands tearing at the sharp metal. The man's leg was bleeding, his jeans ripped, but she focused only on the task. The building groaned again, a sound like the world's last breath. With a final agonizing heave, she managed to wrench the rebar just enough to free him. "Go! Run!" she yelled, pushing him toward the distant stairwell, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of survival. But he didn't run. He turned back, his face a mix of awe and bewildered gratitude. The hard hat slipped from his head, and in that split second, amidst the choking dust and the thunderous roar of destruction, Lena's world came to a complete, frozen halt. The face staring back at her was a ghost from her past. It was Michael, the man who had fathered her son, the man who had walked out on her a decade ago with a suitcase and a flimsy excuse about needing a fresh start. He was here now, a decade later, the hero in her son's bedtime stories, the villain in her life story, looking at her with the exact same stunned expression she wore. The Epsilon Tower was still collapsing around them, but for Lena, the ground had already given way. The collapse wasn't just physical, it was a decade of suppressed emotions and unresolved pain finally breaking free. The world hadn't just stopped, it had been shattered into a million pieces. Michael, the name was a phantom on her tongue, a ghost from a life she had carefully buried under layers of hard work and self-sufficiency. The noise of the collapsing building, which had been a terrifying symphony of destruction moments ago, now felt distant and surreal. She could hear the shouts, the sirens, the grinding metal, but her reality was centered entirely on the man in front of her. His face, 10 years older, was etched with new lines of worry and fatigue. His eyes, the same warm brown eyes she had once been so captivated by, were wide with a mixture of disbelief and a nascent, dawning horror. "Lena," he breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper, "is that really you?" A falling piece of corrugated steel crashed a few feet away, spraying sparks and dust, jolting them both back to the terrifying present. "We need to go now," Lena yelled, grabbing his arm. He winced, and she saw the dark, spreading stain on his jeans. "Your leg. Can you walk?" "It's just a gash," he said, trying to stand. He stumbled, and she had to catch him, her arm around his waist, the intimacy of the contact a shocking, unwanted jolt. He was heavier than she remembered, a bit more broad-shouldered. The smell of metal and dust clung to him, a stark contrast to the cologne she had once known. They moved, a clumsy, desperate duo, stumbling over mangled rebar and shattered concrete. The floor they were on was tilting at an alarming angle. "The stairs I don't know if they're still there," Michael panted, leaning on her as they navigated the wreckage. "We have to try," Lena insisted, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and simmering fury. "What are you even doing here, Michael? After all this time, you're a welder on this site." I came back," he said, a simple, painful explanation that explained nothing. He couldn't meet her eyes. "I heard the tower was coming down. I thought—" "You thought what? That you could just leave and come back when it was convenient," she snapped, the anger finally bubbling to the surface. She was using her full body weight to help him hobble, and the physical effort was making the emotional strain all the more potent. They found a service hatch leading to a maintenance shaft, a dark, narrow tunnel that seemed to offer a brief respite. They slid down a metal ladder, the rungs cold and unforgiving against their palms. At the bottom, they found a small, dusty landing, a forgotten corner of the building, safe for now. The sound of the collapse was a dull roar from above. The silence between them was deafening, filled with a decade of unspoken words. Michael sank to the floor, leaning against a damp concrete wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled up the torn fabric of his pants, revealing a deep, ugly cut on his calf. He flinched as he touched it. Lena, despite herself, knelt down. "Let me see." She pulled a clean cloth from her tool belt and began to press it against the wound. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. She was now his nurse, the woman he had abandoned, tending to the man who was the source of her deepest pain. "What were you thinking?" she said, her voice softer, laced with a weary sorrow. "Just disappearing like that. You had a family, Michael. You had a son." His head hung low. "I know," God, I know. I was scared. I was a kid. I was lost. I didn't think I could be a good father. I thought I'd just mess everything up. I thought you'd be better off without me." He looked up, his eyes glassy. "I was an idiot, a complete coward." The words, a confession of his deepest failings, felt like a punch to the gut. It was what she had always suspected, but hearing it from him, in this dark, dusty corner of a collapsing building, was almost too much to bear. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of a younger Michael, packing his single suitcase, and the words he had said to her then. The excuses had changed, but the core of his cowardice remained the same. A new tremor shook the shaft. A small cascade of debris fell from the ceiling. A voice from above, muffled by the concrete, yelled out, "Any survivors down there? Call out." Michael looked at her, his expression a plea for something she couldn't give. "We have to go. They're looking for us," he said. "Lena, I never stopped thinking about you, about Lucas." "Don't," she said, her voice hard, her hands trembling as she tied the makeshift bandage. "Don't you dare." The question of Lucas was a chasm between them, a painful void that had been ripped open with the falling of the tower. She had a son who looked up to a phantom father. She had a life built on the foundations of a man's abandonment. And now, that man was sitting right in front of her, his confession hanging in the air, a truth that she couldn't accept, not while the world was still falling apart around them. The rescue teams found Lena and Michael, and they were taken to a hospital. Lena's heroic act became a city-wide story, but her joy was mixed with the fear of her secret coming out. Her son Lucas called, thrilled to see his mother on the news, unknowingly adding to Lena's burden. Released from the hospital, Lena met Michael in a sterile visitor's lounge. He thanked her for saving his life, and she deflected his gratitude, insisting she was just doing her job. He confessed that he returned to Boston to find her and Lucas ready to face his past. Lena's calm facade broke, and she unleashed 10 years of fury and hurt. She told him he had no right to show up now, not after she had spent a decade being both mother and father to their son. He acknowledged his failure, but pleaded for a chance to be a presence in Lucas's life. Lena listened, no longer a victim, but a woman with quiet, resolved strength. She told him that she would consider it, but that any decisions about Lucas's future would be hers alone. With that, she walked out into the cold city air, a survivor ready to rebuild her life on her own terms.